time. We are here to celebrate the career of Professor Stephen Small. Yes, yes, yes. I have found myself getting a little weepy. Stephen and I go back a long way. I think the longest when it comes to the Department of African American Studies, 30 years. But what's amazing is that we are here to celebrate him and give him his flowers while he lives. Yes. My name is Eula Taylor, and I'm the chair of the Department of African American Studies, and so glad all of you are here. And we are here because of Barbara Montano from the Department of African American Studies, who worked incredibly hard, along with Cameron, our work studies student who did the slides, and ISSI. We have a packed program, and so we want to get it started ASAP. But before we do that, we're going to have Deborah Lustig, from the Associate Director of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, ISSI, bring you greetings as well as the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Eula. It's my privilege to welcome you on behalf of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues. I want to thank the Department of African American Studies for embracing the idea of doing a joint event to honor Stephen. It's been a pleasure to work with Eula Taylor and Barbara Montano over the last few months to plan this event. I also want to thank my colleague Maxwell Vanderwerker, who is currently cleaning up downstairs, so he won't hear this till he sees the video, and also our student assistants, Shauna Hong and Vivian Yu, for their help in making this a wonderful tribute to Stephen Small and a chance to bring our community together. I'm delighted but not surprised that people have come from all over the world to celebrate Stephen's career, and many more of you are joining via Zoom. Welcome to you as well. If you are here in person, please silence any devices that might make noise during the event. I want to acknowledge that UC Berkeley sits on the territory of Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone people. We recognize that every member of the Berkeley community has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land since the institution's founding in 1868. Consistent with the university values of community and diversity, which I would say are also Stephen's values, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native peoples. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and our commitment to hold the university more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. In 2006, I started working at the Institute for the Study of Social Change, which is now the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, or ISSI. I met Stephen soon after that in a selection meeting for our graduate fellows. After that first meeting, I wanted to have him in every selection meeting because he contributed both insightful comments on the student's application and a sense of humor, a truly rare combination. And he did serve on the committee almost every year, except when he was off running a study abroad program somewhere. As an alum of the program, he was and is deeply committed to the program's work to support students from marginalized communities to succeed in the academy and to do research that centers the needs and perspectives of those communities. Aside from those meetings, Stephen frequently popped into the Institute, often with a visitor in tow. I met his daughter that way. I think it was Diane, but I'm not sure. And Stephen introduced me to Kwame Numako, who will be meeting later today. These were chance encounters, but not really, because Stephen has always been intentional about building community and making connections. Things continued along this way for 14 years. And then in 2020, I got to work closely with Stephen and see his qualities as a leader. In 2020, the university administration decided that it would close ISSI. And one of their justifications was that they hadn't been able to find a new faculty director. When I heard the news, I knew immediately that I would fight that decision as long as the ISSI community wanted to fight that decision. And many of you here today were instrumental in that fight. But a key turning point was Stephen agreeing to become the faculty director. And then he devoted countless hours to building relationships on campus and making the case for ISSI. Today, we are on solid footing and looking forward to celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Institute in 2026. Yeah. This hasn't been announced publicly yet, but the Center for the Study of Sexual Culture has just joined ISSI. With that addition, we now have 8 research centers under the ISSI umbrella, each with a distinct focus, but all working together to foster research on the pressing issues of stratification and social change facing the US and the world. Deans Raka Ray and Lisa Garcia Bedoya each just signed 5-year agreements to continue providing stipends for our graduate fellows. So that program is secure. Associate Vice Chancellor for Research Lak Su, who is also scheduled to speak later today, not here yet, but I'm trusting that she's going to come. But she has clearly affirmed the vital role that ISSI plays on campus and committed additional resources as we ramp up fundraising. We do face some serious financial challenges, so I want to suggest that a great way to honor Stephen is with a gift to ISSI to help us continue his excellent work. Stephen, I'm so appreciative of all that you've done for the Institute. And I'm especially appreciative, and I'm saying this out loud, of your commitment to continue doing that work after your retirement, although in a different capacity. Thank you. And now I'll give the mic back to Eula, who will be our MC today.
I'm serving as the MC, but no, I know how to release a mic. Okay, I just want you to know that. And so we begin with 2 videos, and they're going to run back to back. The first one is from Jimi Jagne, Black Liverpool community activist, local anti-racism campaigner, and co-author with Stephen of the book, quote, 1981, Black Liverpool Past and Present, and that was published in 2022. And that video will be followed by one with Troy Duster, Chancellor's Professor Emeritus, UC Berkeley, Stephen's dissertation advisor, and founding director of the Institute for the Study of Social Change. So we'll start with those 2 videos.
Hey, Stephen, I hope you're having a fantastic afternoon right about now. You deserve this, man. You really do. My profound thanks to the Black Studies Collaboratory Project Manager for inviting me to address today's gathering. I'm privileged to be given the opportunity to join you all in celebrating my great friend Stephen's illustrious 30-year career as a professor at UC Berkeley. My sincere greetings to the Department Chair of African American Studies, the Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, the Associate Director of the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, the various campus administrators, other distinguished members of faculty, alumni, and each and every one of Stephen's family members here this afternoon. No less importantly, I must extend extra special greets to Stephen's many friends, acquaintances, Liverpool A community members, and activists who are viewing this event back here in Liverpool, and who I know will be especially keen to feel represented and join me in delivering this desperately brief but essential tribute to our hometown brother, as well as in expressing heartfelt best wishes as he approaches imminent retirement. We collectively salute him. I smiled broadly, Stephen, when I discovered you decided to represent your career as having been a traverse from one Berkeley to the other Berkeley. There's actually no better pun with which to describe your story. As we both know, the Berkeley of your youth is actually a shorthand reference to one of a ragtag number of crumbly inner city housing estates and tenement blocks, essentially what Americans refer to as housing projects, that collectively made up the then ghetto district of Liverpool 8, or LA for short, where the majority of the city's Black families lived during the mid-1960s and 1970s period of your youth. LA, for those who don't know, by the way, is the British equivalent of a US zip code. LA, you remember, was the marginalized byproduct of a criminal neglect of a community that first dropped anchor in Liverpool as far back as 300 years ago. You'd eventually learn, Stephen, the ramshackle Berkeley housing estate came into being only as a direct consequence of a unique legacy of systemic racism spawned by Liverpool's deplorable twin histories of slave trading and imperialism. Rather than the breaking of you, however, your exposure to this particular Berkeley would eventually become the empowering of you as you begun your journey from Berkeley the estate to Berkeley the university. Make no mistake, the essential elements and forces which would shape and constitute Stephen Small, the future professor, can be sourced and located right here in L8. After being born on the very edge of the Berkeley estate, your family eventually moved you and your brothers when you were age 7 to a new home just over 2 miles away, encroaching into the neighboring and relatively propitious district of Egbert. Your father, a well-known local barber by trade, but no less resolute man of considerable foresight, effectively insulated you from the potential distractions of ghetto life, and by will of his formidable Jamaican blend of country folk wisdom and strict insistence, ensured you stuck with your school books and tended to your already apparent gift for study. A short time after entering one of Liverpool's top high schools, new friends and the curiosity of your teenage years reintroduced you to life in L8. You saw families having to contend with and resist the racism of those times. Your circle of new friends felt forced to reject their schooling and the overt, rampant racism at the low-grade places of learning they reluctantly attended. They were more interested in what they'd learned outside of school and shared with you their fascination with the freedom struggle in the US. You began reading about and became inspired by figures like the Black Panthers, George Jackson, Angela Davis, Kwame Ture, and others. You learned from them it was progressive and not just instinctive to resist white supremacy. You read those books in no small part, Stephen, because you were aware this was something you were not being taught, even at your own school. Subsequently, you realized there were glaring contradictions between the harsh realities of race in your home city and the education you'd been receiving at school. The glorified myths providing the thin veil of untruths concealing Liverpool's role in foundational slave trading and imperialism no longer made sense to you. However, it was only when you were a little introduced to Rastafarianism and began listening to roots reggae music in the mid-1970s that you discovered your true calling. Rastafari not only informed you, as you always like to describe it, about the half that has never been told, it also provided you with the so far missing framework with which to connect Liverpool's investment in slavery and its imperial past with the history of struggle and resistance, not only here but throughout the entire diaspora itself. Roots reggae in particular introduces to the essential moments of struggle for independence throughout the Caribbean and Africa, which you felt strongly were more opposite to the Black British experience and especially the experience of our own community than those no less critical moments associated with the African American liberation struggle. Of no less relevance here today, you were also able to identify a meaningful purpose in what had, by that time, developed into a personal quest to go on and distinguish yourself as a progressive academic. Due to the limits on my time, I'll leave it to your esteemed peers and colleagues to more appropriately assess the size and various impacts of your wider academic achievements. However, I must recognize your achievement in having been tenured as a professor at UC Berkeley. Back here, your appointment was, frankly, without precedent, and as you are all too aware, only Dr. Mark Christian has since repeated the achievement in becoming a Black Liverpool-born professor when he was eventually tenured at Miami University of Ohio in 2004. Such was the size of your achievement. I must also mention the significant amount of written work, seminar time, and presentations you've given over to making observations on Black Liverpool, and on occasion, more formal comparative analyses between Black Liverpool and other situations located throughout more recent diaspora history. Your assessments of Black Liverpool have, to your enormous credit, usually focused particularly on broadening understanding of Black Britain beyond received London-centered perceptions. Moreover, your abilities as an active scholar have been put to good use, pushing local institutions here to decolonize and promote Black history. For example, your involvement as a member of advisory groups at the Maritime Museum and the University of Liverpool that resulted in successful separate campaigns for the establishment of the Transatlantic Slavery Gallery and the renaming of the long-standing Gladstone Student Hall of Residence as the Dorothy Couyer Hall, so named after the city's prominent Black activist. Your influence in Black Liverpool has only increased over time, Stephen, as it's become apparent your personal journey from Berkeley to Berkeley and now back again has been of tremendous benefit to our community. Most notably, you're currently recognized as a pioneering campaigner for local reparations to be made as repair for Liverpool's imperialist past, and not just simply on the basis of the city's history of slave trading. Consequently, you're now considered to be Black Liverpool's foremost academic authority on the decolonization of local institutions. I'm fortunate enough to know most of our current crop of local young activists and students, many of whom remind me constantly of the substantial time and personal support you've given them during your more frequent visits in recent years. I myself owe you the most enormous debt of gratitude imaginable. Your willingness to give back to us has been generous, unquestionable, and without boundaries. On that particular point, your forthcoming and much eagerly awaited book, Black Liverpool is the Real Thing, will not only assess in detail the various impacts of African, US, and Caribbean influences on Black Liverpool culture over the latter third of the last century, it'll also, I believe, represent a significant high point in your undertaking to encourage the stories concerning local Black lives to be told by local Black voices. I anticipate this book will be widely received as your career magnum opus. Stephen, I'm conscious I'm about to transgress on the desperately short amount of time I'm allowed, so sadly I must stop at this point. But I must say again, on behalf of all our people with us today, congratulations on your amazing career, its achievements, and most of all, on remaining loyal to us and continuing to represent. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon and stay Black.
Good afternoon. My name is Troy Duster, and I'm delighted to be able to share a few comments on the occasion of Stephen Small's retirement. Now, I've known Stephen for a full period of his career. Grad student at Berkeley, I was on his committee, doctoral committee, and have watched an extraordinary career develop over the last 4 decades. A few things about his career which I think are important. And it has to do with what Stonequist many years ago wrote in his book called The Marginal Actor. Stonequist was talking about people who come in from the outside of a situation and see things who on the inside either take for granted or ignore. And of course, the most famous of that was de Tocqueville, who in the 1830s, 1840s came to the US and wrote about the extraordinary difference it makes in this country when people have their sociability meetings. He saw meetings everywhere, whereas in Europe that was relatively uncommon. So flash forward in 130 years, and there's Stephen Small, and he sees the African diaspora in ways that many Americans do not. In particular, of course, because of his own background in Liverpool, England. He writes about the American experience from a different perspective. And indeed, he goes to Brazil. So he's got 3 different sites, Brazil, the US, and Europe. And he's written extensively about the ways in which the diaspora has different manifestations of stratification in each of these 3 settings. One example that he uses, I think, is really instructive, and that is the use of museums. Stephen has visited over 200 museums in order to document the ways in which the historical framing of the problem, that is the problem of Blacks in Europe, Latin America, and the US, way the museums frame that history in ways that review or obscure the nature and character of the contributions of Blacks in these 3 settings. I don't have time to go into the details, but I do just want to emphasize that this is a model for certain kinds of social research. Anthropologists used to do that routinely. They would go to other cultures to throw light back upon their own. Social scientists could use more of the model that Stephen has set. He has worked extensively in Portugal, Brazil, France, the Netherlands, Trinidad, Zimbabwe, giving lectures in all of those places and having taught extensively in at least half of them. He is also someone with a very important quality, namely a sense of humor and wit. And so his research actually does sometimes embody both of those characteristics. With that, I join the others who will here celebrate the extraordinary, successful contributions of a long career on this topic. Thank you, Stephen.
Well, we thank Jimi Jagne as well as Troy Duster for sending in those wonderful videotapes. And now we're going to begin with comments from his scholar friends. I'm going to introduce them in the collective group, and then they'll all come up after one another. So the first person is Pedro Noguera, Distinguished Professor of Education and Emory Stoops and Joyce King Stoops Dean, Rozier College of Education, University of Southern California. He's Stephen's friend since their days in graduate school together at UC Berkeley, and also the former director of ISSC, where Stephen was a faculty affiliate. Pedro will be followed by Colin Sampson, Professor of Sociology and Criminology, University of Essex, Stephen's friend since their days in graduate school together here at UC Berkeley. And the last person in this group is Kwame Namako, founder and director of Black Europe Summer School, Amsterdam, former visiting professor in the Department of African American Studies here, and Stephen's longtime friend and colleague. So our first three speakers will be Stephen's scholar friends.
Good afternoon. It's so good to be here. I practically grew up at Berkeley, so it always feels good to be back on campus. And so when Stephen called to tell me he was retiring, I don't know how you can retire before me, because I started grad school before you, and I just agreed to do 5 more years, so I'm doing something wrong, perhaps. But I couldn't resist the invitation. So a few things to share, and you are going to hear this over and over again. The first thing you notice about Stephen is what I would call a mischievous smile, right? There's a playfulness about him that's undeniable. And that's combined with that wit and humor, which is irrepressible. And then that accent. And you're always, where's that accent from exactly? And you find out, yes, he's from Liverpool. Stephen and I were in grad school together, and we formed a friendship, running in the hills, sharing notes about the sociology department, who to work with, who to avoid. And then our families became close. And I'm glad to see his daughters here, who I haven't seen in many years, as well as his brother Colin. I've seen Stephen over the years as his career has progressed and as he's evolved as a scholar. And I would say that Stephen's work as a race scholar is very much in the Du Bois tradition. And I'm gonna share something from one of his books, this one, 20 Questions and Answers about Dutch slavery and its legacy. It's not out there, but it's a short one, but it's certainly well worth reading. He says, Dutch slavery and the slave trade inextricably and irreversibly connected the continents of Europe, Africa, and the Americas and Asia. Today, the legacy of slavery, tangible and intangible, is evident in politics, economics, and the culture of Dutch society. It is most visible today in the social mobilization of Black people and their supporters for acknowledgement of slavery and its legacies. They are continuing a tradition of challenging slavery and its legacies that began several hundred years ago by the hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children who resisted capture, transportation, and enslavement. In small acts and huge protests, they strove for survival, dignity, and freedom. To make it clear that this was not simply another academic publication, he also writes, "This is not a piece of writing intended for a narrow group of scholar specialists, but rather something that we hope the general public, students, and interested individuals will read. We believe that readers of this book will find many insightful suggestions for what to bear in mind when they turn to more traditional and more detailed books on this issue, on these issues." So that, I think, in many ways captures a lot of Stephen's work, his approach to the work, his desire to use history as a way to understand the present and to excavate the past in ways that often it's rendered invisible. And so Stephen, at a time when we now have an administration that would like to render race invisible once again, I just was looking at the new statutes coming out they're ready this time. Right? The Trump folks have come in, they are fully, not only they're making the crazy appointments, they're fully ready to do lots of damage. And we can be sure that departments, universities across the country that explicitly focus on race will have big targets on them because they're going to make DEI and critical race theory in all its forms something to be abolished if they get their way. So welcome to the resistance. I know you're retiring, but Stephen, we got a lot of work to do. And you know, the way I look at it is we survived Reagan. You know, there were a lot of casualties, right, along the way. We survived Nixon. We can survive Trump too. And that, you know, I was thinking about Du Bois. I read recently a book that he published in 1900 on, just before the World Expo, on the state of blacks in America, documenting the condition of black people. And that's why I thought when I saw this, this is definitely the work that your work is part of that legacy. I was also thinking about the work of Ida B. Wells, who's also one of Troy Duster's grandparent or grand aunt, or definitely a relative. And you know, she was documenting the lynchings in this country. And so we survived that too. And so we will survive this period. And because of the work of scholar activists like Stephen Small, we have a strong foundation. So Stephen, I salute you, and I wish you the very best on this next phase.
Colin?
And I share Pedro's concern about what's coming next here in the US, and wish the best for everyone here. First of all, thank you very much, Steve, for inviting me here. Thanks also to all the organizers. I'm really happy to be here to say a few words about Steve. So sometimes the first occasion that you meet another person who's become a close friend is a memorable occasion. People often share stories about that time, what they were doing in that particular place, what was happening at that particular time, what they were thinking at the time. And I must say that my first meeting with Steve was not auspicious, and it did not portend a lifelong friendship. We first met in 1984, very close to where we are now. In fact, 4 floors down in the men's lavatories. No judgment, please, no judgment. And somehow, as we were at the urinals, Steve asked if he was always persistent, as his brother Colin said. Steve asked me if I was the other Brit. Was I the one who had arrived very late for the orientation? I'd actually had some difficulties with the immigration authorities, but I didn't tell him that then. So I'm not of a paranoid cast of mind, but I wondered, how did he know? How did he know I was the other Brit? I still don't know, actually, but it was an indication of his sharp powers of perception that many people have been talking about, including Troy. that made him such an amazing investigator. I would say he was an investigative sociologist. At first glance, the fact that we're both Brits could have been where the similarities ended. I came from the East Anglian Fens, an area of dark soils and reclaimed wetland devoted to agriculture. Steve came from inner city Liverpool. My family were Norfolk farm labourers. His father was a barber who had migrated to Britain from Jamaica. Our way of speaking is completely different. One is slow and flat. I used to talk like that. I can't talk like that much anymore. Well, I used to. The other one is fast and sometimes high-pitched. While we were growing up, we're the same age, more or less, in the 1960s, Liverpool could boast an incredible music scene, including, of course, the Beatles, while the East Anglian Fens had a one-hit wonder called The Singing Postman, whose claim to fame was a ditty about a girl called Molly Flindley, who smoked like a chimney, and for whom his small fame and a few too many pints of beer proved too much as he started falling off, the singing postman that is, he started falling off bar stools in village pubs, and his career didn't really take off in the way that the Beatles did. But what the places that we came from might have in common is that they are both relatively, and I think this may even still be true today, they are both relatively uncelebrated places in the English imagination. Also in common is that many of the people in these two areas, as different as they are, have a communication style based around stories, based around the story. And as I got to know Steve, I saw that he and I had a knack for communicating through stories and for communicating through anecdotes. We then found ourselves, and actually I must thank Steve for helping me with this, we both found ourselves at the Institute for the Study of Social Change. And while there, we became students of some of the gifted storytellers on the planet. The late David Minkus and the person we just heard from there, Troy Duster. In fact, in one conversation, I remember Troy telling me about what he called the structural anecdote, the small story that stands for a bigger reality. And I latched onto that like gold dust. And I think Steve did too, in his own way. Our trajectories then went in different directions. He was far quicker. He was far more focused than me. He finished his PhD in an astonishing 4 years. It took me over 6 years. And the fact that it took me a lot longer couldn't have been the fault of my supervisor, because I had the same supervisor as Steve, none other than Troy Duster, who you've just heard from. I'm sure, as you all know, Steve is a fantastic scholar, teacher, and activist, and I have personally witnessed his many talks in many places, including in my own university, to my colleagues and to my students. And I have always been amazed at the sheer energy that goes into each one of these talks. And this is because that whatever topic he addresses, he makes it politically relevant. He unpacks layers of obfuscation and dissembling. And the British and all colonial powers are masters at obfuscation and dissembling. He does this through remarkable turns of phrase, metaphor, and often humor. And Pedro shared a passage from one of his books, and I'll share another one. So one of my favorites is in one of his books discussing the national and international laws that are supposed to address racism and discrimination. He chides about these laws. These laws are strong on paper, weak in practice, which means that in practice, these laws have no bite. Not only that, they have no teeth, Not even that, some of them don't even have any gums. I thought, what a brilliant way of putting things. I'm almost finished, by the way. So over the years, many of Steve's stories became structural anecdotes for me as well. And I'll end with an adage taken from a story that he related from me of one summer when he picked grapes in the vineyards of France. He was concerned, coming from inner city Liverpool, that this rural work would be backbreaking labor. But he learned there from a fellow worker there, the dictum, pick a few grapes, eat a few grapes. And it is proved to be a very wise motto. And as you can see, he's very well preserved mentally and physically, very, very finely. And this is just personal, but I think that many of you may share this feeling. Every time I've either put down the phone, closed the Zoom, or said goodbye to Steve when we were meeting. I remember one occasion when we had a long walk around London, I felt really uplifted, and no matter, often we discussed very challenging topics and very heavy topics, but he had a way of making me feel alive. He made me feel well. Made me feel ready to take on whatever challenges were looming. And last night, when I met his family members, and I'd met some of them before, but many of them I'd never met, I felt exactly the same. I didn't want to leave that gathering of his friends, so I can see where you get all your gifts from. Anyway, Steve, thank you very much, and keep going, man. Okay.
Hello, good afternoon. Yeah, I'm Kwame Nimako, also very good friend of Stephen. I call my relationship with him parallel lives and intertwined belongings. We have parallel lives because he was born in Liverpool. Anyone who meets Stephen will know that he comes from Liverpool. He says it. He doesn't say I come from England also. Yeah? But I was born in Ghana and spent my formative times in Ghana. But in the 1970s, we all ended up in Amsterdam. He was in Amsterdam and I was in Amsterdam, but we didn't meet there. But he lived among Ghanaians. And then, interestingly, in the 70s and the 80s, we both studied sociology and economics, but he took his PhD in sociology and I took my PhD in economics at the University of Amsterdam. In 1990, at the 12th Congress of World Sociology, 12th World Congress of Sociology, we were both in Madrid. We were around a lot of people we know, but we never met. And then later in 2004, our common friend, Ramon Grossvogel, invited us to make a contribution to a journal that is International Journal of Comparative Sociology on race relations and migration and ethnic minority policies in Europe and the United States. That is where I met Stephen at a symposium in Paris. And of course, when we met, then he started narrating that he has been to Amsterdam, he lived in Amsterdam, and when we started talking, then I realized that we have been around each other, but we didn't know each other. That's what I call the parallel lives. But since we met in 2004, we have been intertwined, that we have always been around. And then we produced our volumes, we produced our articles. He wrote on Britain and I wrote on the Netherlands. And 2 years later, we met again in Chicago, Northwestern University, on the invitation of Tricker Keaton. He invited us when he was working on a book with Tricker and Dylan Clark-Hine on the Black Europe and African diaspora, and where I also contributed. And my contribution became as he commented on my work, it ended up becoming a joint project, which the title was Theorizing Black Europe and the African Diaspora. And it is that article which I used to form the Black Europe Summer School, which has been in existence for 16 years now. And of course, 2007, I invited Stephen back to Amsterdam to give a talk on museums because I was affiliated to the Netherlands Institute for the Study of Dutch Slavery and its legacies. And it was that 2007 that we also founded the Black Europe Summer School. And he has been coming since then. And when he was coming in 2007, he came with his two brothers, that is Colin and Terry. And anytime since then, since 2007, he comes to Amsterdam every time in June and July, and anytime he comes with a family member. Yeah, so I've known almost many of his family members, and Keisha too. We went on holidays together in Greece, and that's where I met Keisha too. So I've met almost all the members of the family, and yesterday I met, I think, the rest now. Now, in 2010, there was a position at Amsterdam University which I helped to create, that is a chair for the study of Dutch slavery. And when the position became free, I asked Stephen to apply, and then he got the job and became the extraordinary professor for Dutch slavery for a period of 5 years. So he's also an emeritus at the University of Amsterdam. Yeah, not only here, he's becoming emeritus here. And so that is how we've been working together all along. And so we have about 3 joint articles in journals, and we have also about 4 separate works in about 4 volumes, book volumes and articles. And he has also given me feedback. When I look back on my publications, I saw that he has given me feedback on 16 of my publications. Yeah, before I met him, normally I used to have friendly readers, and about 3 of them, but since I met him, I have only 1 friendly reader. That is him. Once he comments, it is okay. Yeah, okay, I understand I have 2 minutes, so I have to. So essentially, when I write and I send it to him, I say, give me your Shakespearean magic. Yeah, that is when he writes, I say, you are really a student of Shakespeare. So, yeah, so he edits and polishes my work, so I keep, it helps a lot. One of the things which people have been saying also is about his sense of humor. And that is also the case, because when we were working, there was a time we were working and he asked me, you want a drink? I said, no. So he went to take his soda. We kept working, and he says, you need a snack? I said, no. He says, you do not eat, huh? You do not drink. I said, oh, no, I'm like a Tuareg. He said, what is the Tuareg about? I said, the Tuareg, they say, you drink when you are thirsty, you eat when you are hungry, and you climb the camel when you are tired. So, I mean, if you see Tuaregs, they will be walking on the desert, and they will be walking with the camel. You ask, why is he not on the camel? You know, so they have a sense of animal rights. So, so he picked this up. I didn't know that he remembered. One day I gave a lecture somewhere, and when he was wrapping it up, he turned the thing around to make it a joke. And I didn't say it as a joke, but he did it in a way that the whole class laughed. And I looked at myself, is he a professor or a stand-up comedian? Yeah, because in no time he is able to make something out of nothing. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Those are comments from Stephen's scholar friends. Now we're going to bring up 3 of his former students and mentees. Aaron Winkler, Associate Professor, African and African Diaspora Studies, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Stephen was the chair of her dissertation. Elisa Joy White, Associate Professor, African American and African Studies, University of California, Davis. Stephen was the chair of her dissertation. Kamari Maxine Clark, Distinguished Professor, Anthropology in the Center for Criminology and Sociological Studies, Center for Diaspora and Transnational Studies, University Toronto. Stephen was her mentee during her postdoctoral fellowship here at Berkeley.
Hi, everyone. I'm so grateful to be here today to celebrate mentor extraordinaire, Dr. Stephen Small. And I think one of the true measures of an excellent mentor is how frequently you call upon their example and hear their voice in your head when you're going about your everyday work. And I have to tell you, this happens to me almost every day, certainly all this time, despite having graduated almost 2 decades ago. Stephen's model taught me to, and this is going to sound familiar, always aim for generosity in my time and my spirit, for curiosity in my teaching and scholarship, and for humor in all things. So first, generosity with his time. Let's talk about Stephen's feedback. I don't know about the current cohorts, but in the very first cohort, Stephen's feedback was legendary. And this was back when we turned in everything hard copy, you know? So you got a few scribbled notes in the margins from most people and maybe some sentences on the last page. And I'm not throwing shade on that kind of feedback. Okay. Well, that's not the kind of feedback you got from Stephen. From Stephen, you got these typed up, single space, sometimes multi-page pages of feedback, giving sort of the kind of overarching feedback, the kinds of issues that needed to be addressed. And that is true generosity. He was teaching us how to be scholars, how to think as scholars, write as scholars, question as scholars, anticipate our readers' questions as scholars. And that is truly time-consuming, as I now know well from the other side. I tell my doctoral students that my feedback is my time, which means it's my love and my support and commitment to their scholarly growth. And where did I learn that? I learned that from Stephen. He has always been exceedingly generous with his time, and also generous with his spirit. Honestly, as you all know, there are too many examples of his generosity of spirit to include here, but let me share one that I think is fundamental. When Stephen was leading study abroad in Brazil, he could have fully just used English and gotten by, no problem. But he set about becoming fluent in Brazilian Portuguese, which not only deepened the ways in which he was able to engage with people, but also exemplified his respect for them, his interest in them, and in their home. He embodied the value that people's humanity is always central, and travel should never be approached in an extractive manner, and people should never be treated just as sources for data. And while that may seem obvious, it can be grievously absent in academia. And this is something he modeled for all of his students over all these years, in all different settings, here at Berkeley and abroad. And Stephen also taught me to aim for curiosity in my teaching and scholarship. Stephen has always seemed to me to be endlessly curious about language, about diasporic cultures, about the stories we tell ourselves, definitely about pop culture. Now, I'm going to date myself here, but there were a lot of Chris Rock references in the classroom back in the late 90s. And he was also always curious about almost every single person he met. I saw this in the classroom as both his student and his TA. I saw this as his research assistant, reading through at that time interviews he did with these plantation tour guides who he got through his I can only imagine through his open generosity and his open curiosity. He got these people to say all kinds of stuff about themselves on tape. And I saw this in how he engaged with my dissertation research, how interested he was in his students' journeys. And as I mentioned, I saw it in Brazil, where he really truly engaged with pretty much everyone he encountered. So one example of how this shaped me came from my very first semester as an assistant professor. I was brand new to the state of Wisconsin, and I was assigned to teach an introductory course called The Psychological Effects of Racism. This was right in my wheelhouse, so I thought, no problem. I was not prepared for the difference between teaching about racism at Berkeley versus teaching about racism in Milwaukee. And so after a couple of days of questioning all my life choices, I heard Stephen's voice in my head, and I took his example and leaned into curiosity about my students. Well, how did they define racism? What were their points of resistance to my definition? These were, after all, students who had self-selected into a Black Studies course about racism. So how could I work with their points of resistance and still be a fair and effective teacher to all my students, as well as true to a Black Studies curriculum? And so following Stephen's model of deep curiosity, I ended up writing a grant to support a pedagogical study about teaching racism in a Black Studies department at a predominantly white university in an overwhelmingly white state, and was able to support 2 research assistants with the funds, as Stephen was able to so generously support me and others with his research when we were struggling graduate students. So it was through Stephen's model of always being curious that I found my way as a new assistant professor. And finally, Stephen's model taught me to always aim for humor. Now listen, I could never be funny like Stephen. I feel like it's a small victory if my students even laugh in class. But in all earnestness, I do draw upon Stephen's example of always keeping humor close by. And it serves me and sustains me in many ways as a teacher and mentor myself. And one way it does that is by keeping joy at hand within an academy that's overwhelmingly hostile, violent, devaluing, and dismissive towards Black studies and Black students and Black people. Now, I was trying to pick an anecdote of Stephen's humor. That's very hard to do because there's so many, but I'm gonna end here with one that always sticks with me. Remember how I told you about how his model of learning Portuguese was very important to me when we were in Brazil? By the time I was a TA for him in Brazil, he was already very adept at Portuguese. He didn't need to study anymore, but of course he was still curious about, the culture and strengthening his idiomatic knowledge of the language. So Stephen would just read these joke books constantly. And do you remember this, Stephen? These Brazilian Portuguese joke books. So you'd just be sitting, on the patio grading papers, or maybe on the bus to a day trip, and Steve would just be over there with his book of his Brazilian Portuguese jokes, cracking himself up. So that is the image I'll leave you with of a mentor who taught me to always aim for generosity with my time and my spirit, for curiosity in my teaching and scholarship, and for humor in all things. Thank you, Stephen. You're the best.
This is exciting. I want to retire. When do I get to do this? Come on, advise me, supervisor here. This is really a beautiful moment. And from what I've been hearing, there's so much synchronicity here. When you're with Stephen, we do have these parallel spaces. We're all connected in very interesting ways. And I know we'll hear more of that today. When I found out that Stephen was retiring, it was just about a month ago. And I was in Madrid, no, actually I was in León, Universidad de León, giving a talk, and it was at a decolonizing Black European Studies themed conference. And here it is, Stephen's retiring. And just the night before, with a large group of people, one from Finland, others Germany, Spain, everywhere, a few from the US, a couple of people were talking about Stephen. And so it was so strange the next day to get the email that he was retiring. And I thought, wow, I am here speaking at this conference in León, Spain, because of Stephen. I do the work I do because of Stephen. He's brought me to this space. So it was a really interesting moment. So I first met Stephen in 1997, way back in the day, as a member of the first cohort of the PhD program in African Diaspora Studies, right here. And one of my first classes in that inaugural cohort was with Stephen, and it was about racisms and race in inverted commas and racialization. And it was blowing my mind. I was like, yes, this is what I need to be thinking about. and I am thinking about this, but I'm thinking about it in Ireland. And I had just gotten back from Ireland, and I was thinking about doing work on Black communities in Ireland. And usually when you talk about that, people look at you like, what the, yeah, you know what I mean, right? At least back in the day they did. But I told Stephen what I wanted to do, and he didn't blink. He was like, okay, yeah. And so I worked with him and started doing my research. I got a Fulbright in Ireland, and as noted, he supervised my dissertation that examined African diaspora communities, Blacks in Ireland, something that many thought could never be done. They looked at you like you were mad. Stephen did not do that. On top of that Fulbright, beyond that, his guidance continued through the years. And I found that, as others have mentioned so far, it's very important, though, to have the right people in your life, people that you connect with. And as students, and doctoral students in particular, that student's journey, on that journey, it's so important to find someone who gets what you're doing, supports it without hesitation, and supports it in the sense of advising and guiding a student on their own intellectual journey. He, yes, could take some notes, write some notes, and he was very thorough and direct, and I was always appreciative of that. But also, it was about what I wanted to do, where I was going. And he was going to help guide me, very straightforward about it, and guide me on that journey. So there I was taking a journey because of his support into a realm of Black European studies, a new field called Black European Studies. And then I soon realized that Stephen was also on his own new journey, perhaps, of considering spaces of Black European Studies or returning to it. And particularly, I remember in 2006, he gave a keynote at the second Black European Studies conference, the BEST conference in Berlin. And one thing about Stephen, as we know, we remarked on the humor, of course, but he was at the moment acknowledging the fact that this was a new field, Black European Studies, and that even he as a kid growing up in Liverpool had never thought about Europe in a particular way as something that was close to him or that he was a part of. So he was seeing this transition into thinking about Europe and Black Europe as its own cultural entity, as something socially different but unique and real and tangible. But what he said was, growing up in Liverpool, he said Europe was so far away, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but of course he was saying Europe was so far away and always filled in his mind with things that could make you sick or hurt you. And he mentions German measles, Spanish flu, and Swiss knives, I think, as well, came up. And of course the crowd roared. And I thought, that nails it, that gets it home. That is so Stephen in many ways. And so I also remember how Stephen pops up everywhere. As I noted, he popped up, in conversation here and there, but he is everywhere. Not only is, Stephen who speaks Brazilian Portuguese, but then suddenly he's doing the UC EAP, the UC Education Abroad program in Spain, heading that. And I meet him in Madrid, and there he is, Stephen who speaks fluent Spanish. And working around, he's taking me to the market for tapas, and he just knows everything in Madrid, and there he is. So another Stephen I'm seeing. And then I can remember back in grad school going to a art performance in San Francisco. We went to one, I remember this kind of unusual performance. People were writhing and all. He was like, okay, interesting, okay, fine. And so all these things, I remember Angela and Stephen coming to see when I was on the faculty at University of Hawaii, meeting with my family and my kids, who are now, 18 and 21 as time moves, and all of these connections. So family, intellectual engagement, all of these spaces are part of that. So I know that you're retiring, and I suspect that this is, only the beginning of a new journey. We say that, but I really think that's the case. But I was always struck by your background in pugilism. You told me, I was like, wow. And I thought, wow, that's an inspiration. Maybe I should take that up myself, because it seems you were always well suited for those knocks and bumps, the hard knocks and bumps of life in academia, and you take them with great humor, always. And especially here at Berkeley, with a kind of intellectual space and energy that's comparable to maybe a UFC for scholars. I'll just say that. But always a little bit of levity, and I think that's what's important. Stephen covers the real serious stuff and the hard stuff, but he always makes us laugh. And that has always stuck with me over the years. I teach a Black European Studies class at UC Davis now. and I've been teaching it for a few years, and it's one of the only Black Europe courses really embedded in a department in the country. There are only a few, really. And I always assign that particular article, Theorizing Black Europe, every year to my students. It's one of the first things they read as they're thinking about it. But I was recently going through some supplementary reading lists for my students, getting that together. And I noticed, I was like, oh yes, I need to return to 20 questions and answers on Black Europe that you wrote. And just a note here, and hopefully my time isn't out yet, but I'm running through. Okay. Running through. I was looking it up, and I just kind of casually Googled 20 questions about Black Europe, just thinking it would pop up. And of course, what happened was a whole AI list appeared, giving 20 questions about various things, what we might ask about Black Europe, structural inequality, different types of racialization, all these things. And then it finally got down to, you saw a big thing from Amazon with 20 questions about Black Europe. And I thought, wow, those AI-produced ideas just mined everything that Stephen is talking about. So it just hit me, damn it, I know why you're retiring, and go for it. I understand now. Anyway, again, I'd like to do that too. Stephen, thank you for being a mentor, advisor, inspiration, colleague, and friend.
Okay, wow, what a wonderful occasion. I just got off a plane from Toronto and raced over here, dropped my bag, and took the taxi over, and I wouldn't have missed this for the world. So thank you for the invitation, and thank you, Stephen, for thinking of me. It's really a pleasure to join you on this eve of Stephen's retirement and to say congratulations to him for a phenomenal career. I've certainly been a beneficiary, not only as a postdoc mentee, but as an admirer of his intellect, his humor, his candor, and eventually as his friend. I first met Stephen in 1996 when I was a grad student at UCSC and about to defend my dissertation, which was in 1997, and apply for postdoctoral fellowships, the president's postdoc here at UC Berkeley. I had just read his book at the time and was eager to work with him because of course, his work on the relationship between race, racism, class, and historical structures of inequality. Of course, in his case, a sociologist of race, diaspora, history, and the contemporary moment, Stephen has always been one to cut to the chase, analytically, methodologically, socially. And so when I first met Stephen, he asked me, he asked me to explain what my postdoctoral project would be about, because of course he was assessing whether or not he wanted to work with me just as much as I was enthusiastic about working with him. And I was so in awe of his scholarship and possibly working with him that he would accept my proposition to be my mentor, that I practiced my answer weeks before that fateful meeting. And of course, I had never met him in person at the time. It was just reading his books and seeing the words on the text, which were very different from engaging with Stephen in person. And so my answer, of course, seemed to tick all of the boxes and give him reason to support my 2-year postdoctoral candidacy here. But technically, however, some months into my postdoctoral tenure, so I did get it and moved to Berkeley from Santa Cruz, he broke open my rehearsed elevator speech after reading my slightly revised dissertation at the time, and of course offered advice. And one of the things that he said is that although my manuscript is interesting, the ways that I'm revising it in my own myopic way, he found a nice way to say myopic. I can't remember what it was, but ultimately that was what he meant. He said, I'm really going to have to answer this question, which is, what do you really want to understand and why bother? And what is motivating your research question? And he then followed with the statement, I usually ask that question after colleagues, not necessarily students, but colleagues have had a drink or two at a reception or an event. You remember that, right? And after a couple of drinks, then I really get to ask them, what really matters? What's your work really about? What's at stake? And why should we care? I've never had to answer that question for Stephen, actually explicitly. He was kind enough not to force me to answer that question. But in fact, what Stephen's question or statement about what really matters did for me was it forced me to break open my own neat conceptual mapping and answer that question for myself. And it was there in my work over the 2 years and actually over my academic career that I've struggled with that very question. And in the context of the book that came from the dissertation that under Stephen's supervision, in my preface where I answered that question, I don't know if I ever even mentioned that, but I'll have to highlight the preface, which is actually the answer to that book. And that's the book Mapping Yoruba Networks, Power and Agency in the Making of Transnational Communities. And so it's there that I take on that question from front and center, and that perpetually take on that question in the work and the projects and the initiatives that I take on to really push myself to think about why it matters and what is this really about at the end of the day. And so at the time I had trained as an anthropologist of race and transnationalism and religious formations, and my research was interested in the emergence of the spread of an Orisha transnational movement in Oyotunji village in South Carolina and Atlanta, in various American cities and in the Caribbean and in West Africa. But it was clear that my work was overly analytic and Foucauldian, having studied at UCSC, and not sufficiently grounded in theories of racism and plantation slavery and Jim Crow segregation and the kind of conditions of Black subordination that were critical for thinking about the emergence of a Back to Africa movement in Oyotunji village, a site where people produced an Africa from away from home. And so in many ways, Stephen's question not only marked the beginning of my own search for meaning over the next 2 years of my postdoctoral fellowship under his mentorship, but it also led to my own shift from being an anthropologist of race and religion to a political legal anthropologist of the Black Atlantic and transnational world. And so which was a major shift. I went to law school. I, took on questions that were political and legal questions, and thinking about many of the structures of inequality around which I was writing, but not really writing. And so it's an understatement to say that Stephen's scholarship and mentorship invigorated me as a postdoctoral scholar at Berkeley. As postdocs, my colleagues and I compared notes. We shared what we learned from our mentors, and especially around turning our dissertations into books and what that meant. And in that regard, Stephen's mentorship in so many ways, and I've heard this from so many of you, his mentorship was legendary, conceptually engaged, committed, invested. He taught substantively and by example. During that period, I was able to read his work. I sat in on his multiple classes. I don't know if you remember that, but in many ways, I learned what it meant to be a professor and to teach. And it was those early days of race, class, gender in American communities, theories of race and ethnic relations, just observing him and developing professional and collegial relationships, not only with colleagues, but the ways that colleagues became friends, that students became friends, the humility and the humanity that he brought to those relationships. Many of us, and I've heard this already, benefited from his critical feedback. I certainly did. And my post-dissertation book revisions were what they were because of him. I'll wrap up by saying it was my first practice job talk, and that was hosted by Stephen. And with his help and the reframing of my work outside of the dissertation into the world of Black social thought, this led me to not only multiple job offers and the negotiation of my first teaching position, which was at Yale, where I stayed for 13 years, but he led me to the path for my first book contract. So I'm forever grateful in so many ways, and the mentorship, the engagement, the friendship served me substantively, the input, and shaped me as a scholar. And I'll just end by saying that it was those formal mechanisms, but it was also the informal, the ways that he led by example. And much of that mentoring, the informal, had to do with things like the 7 to 7 p.m. schedule, 7 a.m. to 7, not 7 p.m., but 7 a.m. to 7, and just watching the way that he structured, I mean, deeply structured his life, the kind of commitment to organizing his life, and what it meant to be a truly young an up-and-coming scholar, what the sacrifices were that made that work possible, that it just didn't appear, all, the 10 books or the 12 books, it was the rigorous and committed schedule. And so I'm going to end here by saying that those lessons, both the formal and informal, were priceless, and clearly we see a manifestation of that in his own work. So this is truly a celebration, and I, like so many of us, really are grateful to having witnessed the profound impact of Stephen Small's work, his contribution to academic life, the mentoring that he's done. So congratulations, Stephen. Yours is a wonderful achievement. It's hard to believe that all this time has passed. And I'd like to say a heartfelt thank you for all that you've done for so many of us in so many ways, formal and informal, by example, through humor, through commitment, and we thank you for that, and congratulations.
Stephen's last mentee, who wasn't able to come, sent a short paragraph that I promised her I would read. For Professor Stephen Small, I am here because you were there. It is with immense gratitude and admiration that I honor Dr. Stephen Small on this bittersweet occasion of his retirement, which feels far too early. As a professor and mentor at UC Berkeley, when I was a graduate student and beyond, Stephen left a mark on my career, shaping my intellectual journey and inspiring my work, particularly through collaborations of Black European studies. His guidance, generosity, and insightful critique pushed me to excel, and a sense of humor brought warmth and light to every discussion. And we share an abiding admiration of the late Dr. Veve Clark, whose brilliance and passion for African diaspora studies brought us together in meaningful and transformative ways. The camaraderie, intellectual synergy, and laughter we shared over the years remain some of the most treasured experiences. Dr. Small, your mentorship, contributions to the field have been nothing short of extraordinary. Thank you for the wisdom, wicked sense of humor, and the lasting impact you brought to all who have had the privilege of working with you. Wishing you a well-deserved and joyous retirement. Trika Keaton, professor of Dartmouth College, Department of African and African American Studies. Now we will hear from Lok Su, Associate Vice Chancellor of Research and Professor of Ethnic Studies here at UC Berkeley.
Thank you, Eula. I just want to say it is such an immense honor for me to be here and to share my comments with all of you, and to, oh, okay, more mic. Okay, is this better? Again, it's an honor for me to be here, and such a pleasure as well, to celebrate this wonderful moment, Stephen. I'll have to say that, here, there's certain key themes that just keep emerging over and over again as I hear some of the comments here. And I myself also, while I wasn't a mentor, but we did have an opportunity to work with a graduate student together, who, Catherine Benjamin Golden, who, after graduating went on to get a postdoc, was a postdoc fellow at Stanford, and I believe now is at University of Delaware. So it was such a pleasure to get to know you as an advisor and on that level of being on the dissertation committee. I'm really here to actually speak primarily about your contributions as a leader on campus. And I think as we reflect on this, there is just a long list of so much that you have done for this university to move really, so much of the work that has been done around social justice, around equity, inclusion, and belonging. You have been at the forefront of that, Stephen. But let me just, the notable, this is a very brief, succinct sort of listing. The most notable examples, of course, is your role as chair of the Department of African Studies, African American Studies, and African Diaspora Studies, as well as your service on the task force, the Social Justice Task Force, your role as Associate Director of the Institute for International Studies, and of course, the Director of the Institute for the Study of Social Issues, of which, I think I owe you a great deal of debt, in your stepping in at a crucial moment for ISSI. And I think many of us are aware that it was under tremendous scrutiny, and you really stepped up, to the plate and carried us through, steered us onto the right course. And as the then chair of the Asian American Research Center, which is nested under ISSI, I am forever indebted to you for really, first of all, enabling the possibility of being nested, under ISSI, and under your leadership, being able to survive and thrive, under the circumstances. So really appreciate that work. I think there has been so much said about your international presence, and the scope of your work, not only through research and teaching, but also your role in study abroad. The work and teaching that you did, and the shepherding of students through that very critical and difficult process, of living abroad, adjusting, and making that a critical learning experience. That takes an incredible amount of skill and tact and patience on your part. So thank you for that as well. Now, this is the part where I think I'm going to set aside my notes and speak from my heart here. And just to say, the qualities of your leadership qualities that make you unique and fundamentally irreplaceable. I want to spend just a few minutes to highlight some of those qualities that I see and value tremendously. And I have to say that first and foremost, it is your commitment to interdisciplinarity, and that the values that you bring and the alignment of values that you bring, to ISSI and the public mission of the university has been invaluable. And the interdisciplinary aspect is critical. It is what it creates, the kind of leveraging of collective knowledges and expertise to really move certain themes and projects along. And that has been a critical aspect of the work in ISSI, but also the work of UC Berkeley. It's also the public scholarship that you really place a value on, that engages not just students and faculty, but the larger community, broadly speaking. And so, I think those are two very important aspects that you bring. The second is the collaboration, the collaborative spirit that you bring. And here we've heard intergenerationally, but cross-disciplinarily, cross-departmentally, college sort of conversations that you bring. This is reflected in your advisory board that you constitute, the people that you bring into conversation, and that sort of help you carry out the project of ISSI. I think that is really critical and important to the work. And that collaboration, it's not just domestically and nationally, but it is global as well. And the third part, is the project of social justice and the project of equity and inclusion has been so critical, in carrying on the legacy, of ISSI, and really to amplify that across the campus and the university. And, I'm talking about here the ways in which you see that project as all encompassing, cross-racially, cross-gender, cross again, in all manners of speaking, you bring people together in a collective project, to achieve greater social justice and for the public good. And I have to say that that has been one of the most, critical and long-lasting, enduring impacts, of your leadership on campus. Now, for most people, I would stop there at the 3 points. But I do want to break the three-part, sort of listings and bring in a fourth, just for you, Stephen. And this is where I think people have heard, over and over again about your humor and storytelling. And I have to say that for me, this unique quality of yours of communication, mediation, and community building is incredible. And I think everyone who comes into interaction with you knows and sees the immense impact that it has. And I want to say, I don't want to stop there, because I think it's more than that. It is the political acumen that you have in communicating, and when to use wit and humor as a strategic tool. And I don't think that should be underestimated. And I think the ways in which you bring in storytelling as a really effective communication tool, I've called it, your parables in some way, and I don't think that is an over kind of statement, because in many of your stories, there are hidden wisdom or not so hidden wisdom, and I think we always carry that with us, as we move beyond the locations. And I think all those aspects make you such an effective leader on this campus. And those are the aspects that I really want to highlight. I want to conclude my comments. I remember when we had the conversation about your decision to retire, and you shared with me this one advice that I think your brother has shared with you, which was that better to retire sooner than too late. And so I'm going to heed to your advice. I know I have my 5-minute limit, and conclude by just expressing my deepest and most sincere gratitude for all the work that you have done on campus for the ORUs, for the academic units, and for your students and colleagues. And I wish you, this is a bittersweet moment. Retirement celebrations often are. And, while on a professional level, I'm saddened, to see you leave as the director of ISSI. I know that you will continue to have a role in this university. And on a personal level, I completely respect and wish you the very best, in your next stage of your career, of your life. And I'm really looking forward to continuing our relationship after retirement. So thank you.
Thank you. Now we will hear from a few members of Stephen's large and loving extended family, many of whom have traveled here from afar to celebrate with us. Dion Dow, Stephen's daughter, Colin Small, Stephen's brother, and Angela Lentz Small, Stephen's wife, in that order.
Thank you for being here as we honor Professor Stephen Small and celebrate the extraordinary career of not only an remarkable educator, scholar, and mentor, but also an incredible father. And there isn't enough time for me to tell you about my entire life with my dad and how diligently he worked towards getting his bachelor's and his master's and his PhD. So I'll make a précis of it. But Dr. Taylor, I will take my full 5 minutes.
Okay.
So many of you may know that when I was 11 years old, I moved to California, and as intuitive and perceptive as my dad is, he knew that I'd miss my mom and my friends. And so he made a suggestion. Hey, D, learn to type. You can write letters to all of your mates.
Okay.
So as I learned from both of my parents, I put my heart and soul into this endeavor, and I gave 110%, and I could touch type about 40 words per minute. So while I did write letters to everyone, I also typed many of my dad's written notes and his bibliographies for his PhD papers. And this was during the time of MS-DOS, if you all remember that. So one time, only one time, I did forget to close out the bold command, and he printed it all out on campus. And after he saw it, I didn't do it again. You pretty much learn the first time with my dad. So another thing about him is he always knows someone to connect you with for almost anything that you wish to do in life. That person could be in any corner of the globe, and he can make the introduction in any number of languages. So I can't count how many of his colleagues and students I've met over the years, some of whom I still remain friends with, and I'm sure all of you in here can say the same. As time goes on, I saw some of the respect and love that my dad earned from his colleagues at what was the Institute for the Study of Social Change. It was no surprise to me when you accepted the role there. But back then, it was when they put their money together to get me a new pair of sneakers for when I was running track in 7th grade. And I can hear Dr. Minkus right now saying, hey man, we need money. Dion needs new sneakers so she can burn up the track. My dad does a much better impression of his good friend, may he rest in peace. So on our kudos board, and I say ours, but it's really my dad's, I noted how we described our esteemed Dr. Stephen Small as friendly, curious, hardworking, intelligent, committed, respected, diplomatic, and I continue to quote as educating us, his firm devotion to the field, and an exemplar in the field of academia. But I saw no acronyms, and as ubiquitous as they are, and as my dad evidently is, like GOAT, greatest of all time. But since you're not a rapper, Dr. Smalls, I've got one for you, and it's the GJ Tote, the greatest joke teller of all time. So if you can, get him to tell you the one about the wire brush and the Dettol. That was my favorite. So when he isn't telling us jokes, my dad tells us straight. I recall a conversation I had with him just a few short years ago when I told him I was going to pursue a second bachelor's degree and a second career in nursing. So I said, Dad, I'm going to take it slow. I'm going to take it steady because it's a marathon. And I thought he'd love that because that's an analogy and he loves those. And so I thought I was impressing him, but no. So he didn't hesitate to tell me that at my age, I was in my early 40s back then, he said, it's more of a 10K, D. So I'd get on it. Suffice it to say, I will have my doctorate in nursing in the next few years, and I owe that mostly to my dad. Thank you. Keisha, remember our visits to see our dad in California over the years? He'd always grace our palms with money for various activities and obviously to go shopping. So after one of our many shopping expeditions, Dad looked at us and he said, hey, you never give me any change. I give you all this money, you never give me any change. Keisha and I looked at each other in sheer disbelief and utter confusion. And Keisha said, well, Dad, you've never asked us for change. Yeah. So he may not ask you to reach out to him during his retirement, but I'm asking you, and I challenge you. Keep in touch with him. Keep fueling his relentless desire to learn and to network, because in retirement, I know you'll bring the same energy and curiosity to your new pursuits as you have done during your admirable career. So, Dad, thank you for being such an incredible father and teacher. Your legacy will live on across the globe in the countless lives that you've touched, in the halls of the fine academic institutions that you've called home. You've made a difference that will have impact for many, many years. We wish you nothing but happiness, good health, and all the best in your retirement. And in the words of Eric Idle in Life of Brian, just remember to always look on the bright side of life. Thank you.
Well, we can certainly see where she gets her humor from. She gives you a tough act to follow this day. Good afternoon, everybody. So excited to be here. To be with so many friends and family, to celebrate Stephen's career and wish him the best as he moves on. It's so wonderful to hear from all the speakers this afternoon with their wonderful perspectives and reflections about Stephen. Most importantly, a massive congratulations to my big brother, Stephen, on such an accomplishment and this forthcoming retirement. Steve, you've had an amazing career. You haven't only forged yourself forward, but that can clearly be seen from the remarks this afternoon. You've also brought others along with you. You've always looked back to others to see how you can help them. But, you know, not everybody knows just how hard you've worked to achieve this success for yourself and for others. To see that, I think we have to go back to our early childhood, back to when we were all growing up on Amstel Road in Liverpool. We came from a hard-working, working-class family. Our mum and dad worked hard and instilled the value of hard work on all of us. Our family didn't have a lot of money or privilege, but we had the love and the support of our mum and dad. And that support and love was our fortune. But love and support and encouragement is only a foundation. It's not a substitute for hard work. Stephen took that foundation and he worked very hard. He stayed very focused, and also in the face of all adversity. Unfortunately, the system, along the lines of what Jimi Jagne was echoing in his introduction, the system for so many of us was geared towards failure in academia. But Stephen fought on. Even our headmaster was surprised to see you return to school to go into the sixth form. I believe he told you that the sixth form was only for those who were going to go to university. What did he know? He didn't expect to see you back in school that day. He expected you to fail. But needless to say, your accomplishments in academia speak to your success, not to any failure for that some had planned for you. Now, when Steve was in that sixth form, I remember snooping upstairs in his attic bedroom, which was obviously off limits to me, but as a little pesky younger brother, who cares? So I was doing a little bit of nosing, and I found Stephen's revision timetable. And I thought to myself, I have a timetable, but that's like to get me to class. Sometimes on time, sometimes not. And I also remember thinking to myself, why would you have a revision timetable if you didn't have to? And more importantly, how would you stick to it if the teacher didn't make you? Steve was not only hardworking, but he was organized and he was disciplined. Not only did his revision timetable include what subjects he was going to study, but the specific contents of the class. Steve also worked hard outside of academia. Again, going back to the early days, you were up, I don't even know what time. By the time I got up, Stephen was coming back. When I was getting up to get ready to go to school, Stephen was coming back from finishing his paper round before he went to school. Later, Stephen worked in restaurants and hotels. He washed dishes, everything to support his education. And then he went to France to pick grapes, as Colin said. I had a little bit of a different take on it, actually. I think Stephen was told, oh, we'll go down to France, you pick a few grapes, you eat a few grapes. But when he actually got there, it was hard, backbreaking work. I don't know if he ate many grapes. But you know, he didn't quit. He stuck it out, and he even learned French when he was down there. But you know, obviously it didn't take him a summer to learn French. Again, that was another persistent, long, determined track that he spent painstaking hours to teach himself French. And as we've also heard, he speaks Spanish, he speaks Portuguese, dabbles in Dutch, perhaps more than dabbles. In the early 80s, I spent time with Stephen in Amsterdam. How many jobs did you have then, Steve? Yes, quite a few, right? And then we returned to England after Amsterdam, and Stephen got his first, I would call, professional gig at the Policy Studies Institute, PSI, in London. And what did you do in your free time? Do you remember? You volunteered at a youth hostel to help others. Even when he was working professionally, he still reached out to help others, even those that may not have been less fortunate than him, but certainly had not excelled up to that point as he had. Now, after he moved to America, things began to really shine in academia, not because they got easier, but because he finally got the opportunity to channel all of his hard work into academia. And just like he had done in the past, he continued to excel. The day that you graduated from UC Berkeley with your PhD was one of the proudest days of my life. As the first Black PhD from Liverpool, and apparently now there's only 2 of them. Oh, 3. Yeah, 3 now. As the first Black PhD, we looked at our hometown newspaper, the Liverpool Echo, who dubbed them Mr. Brains. I think I saw the clip up there, yeah. People look at you, Steve, and they admire you, and they think that you're a natural-born academic, and you are. But what I would like to stress today, you were not born into academia. You worked very, very hard to achieve what you've done. You've worked your whole life to achieve it, and with hard work and determination. So what will you do now in retirement? I've never seen you swing a golf club. Never seen you hold a fishing rod. No, that's not for you. You won't be leisurely or idle. And although you've accomplished so much so far, I know you have many, many more wonderful things to do. Just like when you got to channel all of your energy into teaching, research, and writing books, now I believe you'll just move on to the next chapter. Congratulations, Steve. You really deserve it.
Angela?
I'm going to be the least of the Smalls in terms of public speaking, but I still take this as an honor. First, I want to start with honoring the people who brought us Stephen Small, Gladys, and Alvin Small. All the things that they endured. His mother was cast out from her family with her life with Stephen and her children. The dad came during the Windrush generation from Jamaica and endured disrespect and hardship and raised kids and grandkids like Leon, who still believed in hard work and trying and finding the way. So I'm going to play a bell for just a moment for Alvin and Gladys. Next, I want to thank everyone who worked so hard to make this event, the reservations, the catering, the invitations, the room set up, the room takedown, the kudos board. Again, heartfelt thank you. Stephen has been anticipating this and working on his talk for weeks, and this is a joy, a deep joy. I want to thank African American Studies generally and Stephen's work bestie, Eula Taylor, for hosting all of us. I also want to thank the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues and Deborah Lustig. Again, this is all not possible without their contributions and foresight. I want to thank all who have traveled from far and near, the bookings, the traffic, the travel lines, the weather delays. Again, I honor you. First, a quick observation about these times. They're dire in many ways. The political climate, the extreme weather, the cyclone bomb hitting us now, for instance, on the West Coast in California. Nevertheless, these are times for hope and kindness with each other. Hope that we know our ancestors have come through worse and prevailed so we can continue to overcome. Kindness for the beloved community that you all are. We may not get the respect and caring we need in public, but we can give it to each other. Look to your left, look to your right. This is the beloved community that can sustain us. Next, I want to, in our family, we love pop music. Popular music, I should say. Pop music means something else. So I want to honor our collective sadness and suffering in the immortal words of Sam Cooke over 60 years ago. There have been times that I thought I could not last for long, but now I think I am able to carry on. It's been a long, long time coming, but I know that change is going to come. Yes, it will. So I know Stephen. Let me need a drink for a moment. I know Stephen in at least two ways, as a spouse and a scholar. So much has been said about Stephen's academic contributions. I have one thing to add. I know no person who dedicates more time and thought to teaching, writing, speaking, and administrating. Every project and pursuit gets intensive concentration and effort. Sorry, I cry when I move. Oh, no. I bawled at my own wedding. For those of you who were there, you'll remember. Stephen is the guy. Some of you know him as Steve, of course, from the early years in California, who can look through archives tirelessly and memorize Portuguese verb tables. We've heard that again and again. Again, none of us coordinated our talks. Now is Stephen's spouse. Stephen, meeting you is a profound and ongoing blessing in my life. We share so many loves, each other, family, ideas, books, travel, and foods. Your dedication and sacrifice for both of our families continues to move me. I think of you sitting with my mom on the front sofa, listening to her talk through the family photo albums. She couldn't. My mom's too disabled to be with us today. She's in Washington, but she would love to be here. You drove mom to the bank. My mom wouldn't write a check, paid everything cash. So she needed to go to the bank all the time. And Stephen, when I was at my last, Stephen would take her to the shops, like the grocery store, and wait patiently. Your children are charming and big-hearted. I'm impressed with the next generation's sense of responsibility and focus. Our grandchildren are a delight. Chatty, busy, and of course, beautiful. We've had so many lovely moments and days together in our home, in community, and traveling. I cherished our past trails together and look forward to future paths with you. And I want to read our lyrics from our first dance at our wedding. At last, my love has come along. My lonely days are over, and my life is like a song. At last, skies above are blue. My heart was wrapped in clover the night I looked at you. I found a dream that I could speak to, a dream that I can own, call my own. I found a thrill to rest my cheek to, a thrill I have never known. You smile, and then the spell was cast. And here we are in heaven, for you are mine at last. Etta James. Thank you all for coming.
How sweet. Thank you, Angela. Wow. I had the honor to attend their wedding many moons ago in San Diego. So now the professor of the hour, Professor Stephen Small.
I feel humbled and honored by everything that people have said. And many people have said clearly that I'm witty and entertaining. But I want you to know there will be no jokes today.
Okay.
I want you to know that I don't just play a one-string banjo. So in today's presentation, I'll try my best to be as tedious, monotonous, and boring as any other ivory tower armchair academic. But with your generosity, if I fail, I hope you'll forgive me. The impact of African Americans on the racial and political consciousness of Black people in my hometown, Liverpool, as you heard from my friend and colleague, Jimi Jagne, was monumental. We listened to Motown. We followed Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. We protested the arrest of Huey P. Newton and Angela Davis. And we read Soledad Brother, Black Bourgeoisie, and the biography of Angela Davis, especially Angela Davis. African Americans were the coolest Black people on the planet, hands down. And so growing up in Liverpool, the idea of visiting a Black Studies department was a distant dream. If you said you expected to study at Berkeley and teach in a Black Studies department and be on a committee with Angela Davis, people would have said to me, "You're hallucinating, mate." And it's not entirely an exaggeration to say that I've done all this and I've lived a dream. I was able to study and teach and share a PhD committee with Angela Davis. And all my friends in Liverpool are jealous and admiring, but also encouraging. Bob Marley sang, "Some people have hopes and dreams. Some people have ways and means." This campus has given me so many ways and means to develop professionally and personally, intellectually and analytically, and also in terms of political consciousness. I traveled from Liverpool to the United States to explore the African diaspora. First and foremost, Berkeley facilitated my primary research on racial categories under slavery in the Caribbean, on the struggle for power and resources in museums, on the political economy of Black Europe, and on the legacies of Black Liverpool. I've researched the disparate geographies of the African diaspora, exploring distinct differences and striking similarities in structures of political domination, economic exploitation, and social subordination. And of course, I've also studied the irrepressible resistance in the quest for social justice. At Berkeley, I've shared research, teaching, and mentorship with colleagues and students that put the African diaspora experience at the center of their focus. And I'm proud to say that along with my bestie, I've been involved in the development of the first PhD in the United States in African diaspora studies. And that PhD now has been going for over 25 years. With the support and encouragement of my department and the campus, I established study abroad programs in Zimbabwe and Brazil, and I worked with education abroad programs in France and Spain. I studied French, Spanish, and Portuguese, it's true. And people are often shocked, and they're also impressed. And they say to me, But most people just learn one foreign language and yet you've learned 3. They have this idea that I speak these languages with the same proficiency as I speak English. I do not. This is wrong, and I tell them, I speak 3 foreign languages badly instead of 1 foreign language goodly. On this campus, my knowledge has broadened, deepened, and become enriched in ways I never anticipated. I've shared bread, stories, and insights with colleagues and students in Latinx studies, Asian American studies, and Native American studies in ways that would have been impossible had I stayed in the UK. By the way, as you can tell, I failed to develop an American accent. I have a born and bred Liverpool and Scouse accent. And it's another example of the charm of Berkeley. The campus demands outstanding research, teaching, and service, and yet it still facilitates individuality. I've been here as a professor for 30 years, and then before that as a graduate student for 5. And I still sound like I'm fresh off the boat. And that's how I'll probably sound for the rest of my life. The Institute for the Study of Social Change, now called the Institute for the Study of Societal Issues, shaped me from the moment I arrived. Research methodology and research methods, interacting with fellow students from multiple departments and from every walk of life, sharing similar interests and bringing different perspectives, and always with an eye for scholar activism and pathways to enduring social justice. I want to thank my mentors, advisors, colleagues, and students in my department, at the Institute and the campus. I thank Jimi Jagne in particular, my brother-in-arms from L8, who's described my origin story with such insight, originality, and in a desperately short opportunity. I thank the many staff with whom I've worked over the many years. My sincere appreciation to everyone who has spoken on behalf of me today, and to the very many others who sent in messages and stories and photographs. I've been touched beyond belief and surprised that there hasn't been anything too embarrassing. I thank colleagues and associates and participants at the Black Europe Summer School, which I've been involved in since 2007. I thank my friends and colleagues in the Department of African Studies, and Deborah Lustig and Max van der Varken and others at the Institute for the Study of Social Change. I thank all of my friends and associates in Liverpool. Some of them I've known for the last 10 years, but many others I've known for my entire life. They continued the struggle for social justice and what we today call decolonizing my mind. And their minds, and everyone's minds, if we can. No one is more important to me as members of my family, beyond members of my family, than Angela, who is a member of my family. My wife, my lifelong companion, my partner and confidant, my beloved wife. We spend more time together, have more conversations, share more analysis, more emotions, more good times, and we weather the bad times of a difficult world more than anyone else I know. We share our hopes and dreams, and we find the ways and means to live our fullest lives. I'd also like to thank those we have lost, like Hardy Fry and Jerry Platt and David Minkus, who played such important roles in my life. I miss them all, and especially David Minkus, who is my teacher, my mentor, my colleague, and my closest friend. His generosity and words of wisdom and humor reverberate in my thoughts every day, as I'm sure they'll do for the rest of my life. But the ways and means to my life trajectory began much earlier than Berkeley, and it goes without saying that family, as Angela pointed out, has played a crucial role. Many of my family members are here today, and I love that you've traveled so far to be here with us. First and foremost are my parents. Now, we all praise our parents, and if we don't, then we should. And each story of praise is unique. And so I take the opportunity to thank my parents from the bottom of my heart. They created the foundation upon which everything else in my life was built. And my story is this. In England in the 1970s, it was legal to leave school at the age of 15. And all my friends left school, but not me. I wasn't allowed. My parents said, no, you've got to stay. You will achieve things that we've never achieved. As Angela said, my dad arrived in Liverpool from Spanish Town, Jamaica, in 1947. He was a barber. My mother was born and raised in Liverpool, and she worked in factories, and she cleaned people's houses. They were an interracial couple that met and married in the 1940s. And my mother was cast out of her family for marrying my dad. They had struggled, really struggled. People don't think of me as timid and obedient. They're not the ideas that come to mind. But that's how I was as a kid. So when my parents told me stay at school, begrudgingly, I obeyed. And I was resentful. My friends had freedom, jobs, and money, while I was left at home reading books and studying. But as I progressed in higher education, in travel and autonomy, my deep teenage resentment turned quickly and profoundly to appreciation and gratitude. I mean deep, deep appreciation and gratitude. And I thank them every day of my life. And although they have both passed, it's reassuring to know that they both lived to see me become a professor, and they were immensely proud. So, if there are any young people here today, the message is listen to your parents. And actually, many people here today are not kids, but you don't have to be a kid to listen to your parents. So you should do so too. Ways and means were also provided by community elders and activists in Liverpool 8. People like Mr. Joey Joel Sr., Jimmy Rogers, Sandra Antigua, Perry Lee, Chief Angus Chukwemeka, Dorothy Cooley, Wally Brown, Carleen Montoot, and Chief Benegwuna. People here won't know who they are, but they are names that resonate back home in Liverpool. I frequently met those elders on the streets of the original Berkley, on Berkeley Street. And there was reggae and Rastafari too, as Jimmy mentioned. Ways and means were also provided by community organizations like South Liverpool Personnel, the Charles Wotton Centre, and Elamu Academy. They gave me the encouragement and the fortitude to soldier on in my studies. And despite the racist nonsense taught in Liverpool schools, again, as Jimmy has described. And yet I recognize that life is full of contradictions. And while Liverpool was racist, fundamentally racist, I have to admit that it also gave me many strengths. My Scouse identity has always been with me. I left Liverpool, but Liverpool never left me. I lived in Liverpool, and Liverpool continues to live in me. Liverpool gave me confidence in the face of adversity, a bottomless energy and enthusiasm, an appreciation for life's ironies, a strong sense of local identity, and a deep reservoir of comedy and humor, one that rises to the surface on just about every occasion. And of course, our unmistakable accent. So I recognize that some changes happened in Liverpool, in schools, universities, and museums, and some of them have taken small steps in confronting racism. It's more than we've ever had in Liverpool before, but it's still not as much as we deserve. And we look forward to when small steps become giant strides. Because I'm from Liverpool, I'm constantly asked two things: football or soccer, to use the local vernacular, and the Beatles. On football, I have nothing to say. Liverpool's reputation in football speaks for itself, and it doesn't need me to do it service. With regard to the Beatles, I have two things to say. I understand that people want to hear about them. But people should also understand that I was only 6 years old when the Beatles became famous. And at 6 years old, I didn't share the same enthusiasm for the Beatles that my two sisters did. Carmen, who is here, who was 16 at the time, and Jennifer, who has sadly passed, but we think of it. So I didn't share that enthusiasm. And second, I need to say, the Beatles had a black manager, Harold Adolphus Phillips, known professionally as Lord Woodbine. He was a calypsonian from Trinidad, a nightclub owner, and a producer of music and artists. He took the Beatles to Hamburg, and we have a photograph of him taking them there. I knew about him. He got his haircut in my dad's barbershop, and he has achieved more recognition, unfortunately, after his death than he did during his life, which is a shame. One last thing on Liverpool. I'm going to say a few sentences to my people back home who are watching on Zoom. It's our version of Jamaican patois and local slang. Maybe you'll understand, maybe you won't, but don't worry. I'm just thanking them. First, may I thank me brethren, Liverpool massive, for the way on a big me up. And may I big up myself and big up Liverpool. Ya know. Second, I'm going to use a local dialect. A regi megemba de blegak hegi, the pregan yeg avenue claygubs, the megeth the degist, the kegani vegal, and kegek legans. Degol egol lege vegan megai megem a regi. Legai ke was dege yegest the dege. You know what I mean, la? When you retire, you have to have a message for your people, and that was it. But back to Berkeley. Back to Berkeley. And Berkeley's academic excellence. I don't want you to get the idea that my entire life has been nothing but study, research, teaching, and activism. I got other things from Berkeley too. For example, I've dramatically expanded my culinary palate, and I've gotten to eat food I've never ever eaten before, and had never even heard of before. The first couple of weeks I was in Berkeley, and a student said to me, "Let's go get a burrito." And I said, "What's a burrito?" And thanks to the Multicultural Interracial Students Coalition, I've also had sushi burritos. What a delight. Okay. One night, I was cooking food at my friend and mentor's house, David Minkus, and one of the students called and said, "I want to bring a friend. Is it okay?" I said, "Sure, bring your friend." The student showed up. There was no friend. I said, "Where's your friend?" She said, "Well, when I told him it was an Englishman cooking, he decided not to come." The student didn't know that we were West Indian. Okay. I don't want to spoil the moment, but I have to say something very briefly about the recent election. And I echo the words that Pedro and Angela have mentioned. We're somewhat despondent by the recent results, but enough of us have read African American, diaspora, and African history, and the history of other struggles to know that our ancestors faced obstacles and more, faced many setbacks and more, pressed on and more. And we draw upon our knowledge of them and our inspiration from them to maintain the resolve, the determination, and the endurance that we draw from them and that we have. And so we'll press on too. Some people are wondering what's next for me. It's clear several people have plans for me to continue to work at Berkeley, even after I retire. And I'll do some of that. I will continue to pursue some of my personal and professional priorities. Angela and I will take a break somewhere sunny and warm in January, maybe in the Caribbean or Hawaii. I'll turn off my email and I'll turn off the phone, so give us a break for a couple of weeks, okay? I'll maintain a professional relationship with my department, with the Institute and the campus. I'll continue with BESS, Black Europe Summer School, and so you'll probably see me around. I also plan to spend several months a year in Liverpool. I just submitted my latest book manuscript on Black Liverpool to the University of Liverpool Press. It's my homage to Liverpool. It's called Black Liverpool is the Real Thing, African, West Indian, and Afro-American culture at the end of the 20th century. It's truly a labor of love as I seek to expand our understanding of Black Britain, historically and at present, beyond the limitations of Black London. Let me finish with a short story about the person who did the most for me at Berkeley, my faculty advisor, mentor, colleague, and friend, Troy Duster. I mentioned earlier that people don't think of me as timid and obedient, and I'm pretty sure they don't think of me as gullible, credulous, and naive. I'm not now, however, I used to be. Before I arrived here in 1984 as a graduate student, I had been fed a steady diet of American films like Taxi Driver, Scarface, Fort Apache the Bronx, Serpico, and The Godfather. Can we ever forget the scene with the horse's head? In England, we regularly saw images of cops with guns, where no cops in England had guns at that time. So when I was offered a full scholarship to study at Berkeley, I couldn't understand why the Yanks, as we innocently called them back then, would give me money for my own benefit and not expect anything in return. I couldn't understand why Troy Duster invited me to become a graduate affiliate at the Institute for the Study of Social Change. I couldn't understand why I got several teaching positions in the Department of Afro-American Studies, as it was called. Universities in England had given me little or nothing. My natural working class Scouse suspicion reared its head, and I remembered the scene in The Godfather where Marlon Brando says to one of his people, "You have found paradise in America, and I'll do a little favor for you. And at some point in the future, I may ask you to do me a little favor." So for a while, several years, I had this terrifying image of Troy coming to me one day and saying to me, "You found paradise at Berkeley. I've done you a favor, and now I need you to do a favor for me," and handing me a gun to do the favor. But it didn't happen. And after knowing Troy for many years, I told him the story, and he laughed with his usual calm and his tempered smile, and he said softly and succinctly, "Stephen, I'm helping you, and you will help others." And it's just that simple. African American Studies, the Institute for the Study of Social Change, and UC Berkeley gave me the ways and means to help so many people here on campus, in the US, in Liverpool, and in many other nations. And I'll continue to do that in retirement, as well as continuing to help myself. It's been an honor and a deep, enduring fulfillment to end my time here, not only as a professor in African American Studies, but as the director of the institute that Troy Duster founded. I think it's appropriate. So Troy, I thank you and appreciate that the little favor you expected of me was very far from what I feared it would be. Thank you, everybody, and I expect that you may see me around. And meanwhile, be sure to get up, stand up for your rights. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And yes.
Thank you.
Showing love for Professor Small. And now we invite all of you to a reception with an open mic and a toast that will begin with Dr. Leon Hall,